This week, the nation was horrified by yet another mass shooting, this time a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, where 26 people were killed, a third of which were children. Much was made of how often these kinds of mass shootings occur and of the political inertia that defines the gun debate. But as a minister, I thought specifically about the faith community's reaction, particularly white evangelicals, who, according to the Washington Post this week, remain as skeptical as ever of gun control, despite subscribing to a Christian message generally understood to be nonviolent. Joining me now is Daniel Howell, professor at Liberty University. Daniel, how do you reconcile a message of nonviolence and peace, which many of us in the Christian faith and in other faiths try and preach and live by, with saying good people ought to arm themselves and be trained to use violence against those that are violent? How do you reconcile that, and do you see any inherent contradiction?
I do not. I do not see any inherent contradiction, because there's defense and there's offense. And violence, we should not use violence to harm people in an offensive way. But sometimes you have to use violence in a defensive way to protect people, to protect yourself and protect others. And this is self-defense. And there's nothing unchristian about self-defense.
But who draws the line of what's self-defense? I mean, we've seen acts that were made against people, and there was the claims of self-defense because they perceived it as a threat. Don't you get into a real problem when self-defense becomes the rule of the day, when the line of self-defense can easily become offense? We've seen that in cases like Trayvon Martin.
You are correct that sometimes a court of law will have to determine whether something was done offensively or defensively. But the fact remains, listen, when I think about gun laws and what would be common sense gun laws and what makes sense with gun laws, I start with two basic facts. Fact number one, that guns exist. We can't uninvent them. They're here and they're not going to go away. We have 300 million guns in this country, so we have to find a way to live with them. And basic fact number two, guns can be used offensively to commit crimes, to cause harm to people, to commit murder, and guns can be used defensively to prevent crimes, to stop a crime in progress. We saw this played out perfectly last weekend in Sutherland Springs, where we had a madman using a gun offensively to commit a crime, to commit mass murder, and we had a hero who used the gun defensively to stop that crime in process. And I think that's actually a very Christian way to act. It's loving your neighbor.
Well, if we had armed people in that church, though, could that have prevented the massacre? I mean, the hero that you referred to happened after the fact. I'm not sure if you had people sitting there with that were armed with automatic weapons that would have prevented the massacre from happening. And certainly all of us salute the guy that you call a hero. But isn't the real issue having the automatic and semi-automatic weapons available that could do such mass damage by a madman that no one could know in advance that they were moving? There's always the saying that guns don't kill people, people do. But if people didn't have automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons, they couldn't do as much killing as we saw in Sutherland Springs.
Well, but they do. People do have guns. That's what I'm saying. We have to reconcile the fact that we live in a world with guns. And our gun laws should be structured so that we minimize the amount of guns that people who would use them offensively to commit crimes. We want to minimize the number of guns in their hands. We want to let people who would use guns defensively, we don't want to interfere with them using guns to protect themselves and protect their families. So our gun laws should be structured in that way.
But do you, when you say gun laws should be structured, do you agree that we should outlaw automatic weapons, semi-automatic weapons, and have background checks? When you say the structure specifically in those areas, what do you say?
Oh, I absolutely believe in the background checks. I think those are good laws. See, good laws, they would prevent people from If you have demonstrated that you're willing to use a gun violently to commit a crime, if you've been convicted, for example, of domestic abuse, if you've used a firearm previously in an armed robbery, the background checks are going to reveal this and prevent those people from legally purchasing and possessing firearms. And those are good laws. But laws like gun-free zone laws or pretend gun-free zone laws, where you slap a sticker on a door and say no guns allowed, those are bad laws because the only people that are not going to bring guns in those locations are people who are rule followers, who are law-abiding people. And so you've effectively disarmed them, and you've created a disparity between the haves and the have-nots, where the people who have the guns are those who are willing to break laws, who are willing. If you're willing to go into a school, for example, and commit mass murder, you're not going to be deterred by a sticker on the door. But if you're a law-abiding person, a rule-following person, you will. So what you've done is you've created a disparity between the haves and the have-nots with guns, where those who will use them offensively have the guns and those who would use them defensively don't. And that's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for more gun violence, for more death. And I would point to places like Chicago, LA, New York, Washington, D.C. as examples of where these bad laws in place create more gun violence.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Professor Howell of Liberty University.
Thank you.
Up next, an innocent mistake